My name is Erick Elgin. I'm the lake manager for the lake program manager for the Cooperative Lakes Monitoring Program and an aquatic ecologist with MSU Extension. I work closely with the whole team on this parameter, but especially Joe Latimore, who just finished presenting Score the Shore. And Joe will be giving the second half of this presentation. So I'm going to kick this off with the Exotic Aquatic Plant Watch is an invasive species protocol. And so we train our participants, our volunteers, on how to identify invasive plants early when they invade early into a lake so that actions can be done. But I like to begin this presentation with a little bit about aquatic plants in general. And aquatic plants are an important piece of a lake ecosystem, and there's a tremendous amount of diversity. There are way more native plants than there are invasive species in our lakes. So a lot of diversity. That diversity provides a tremendous amount of habitat, of different types of habitat for many organisms in a lake. Also, they have impacts on the chemistry of the water body. They have impacts to the water clarity of the water body. And in general, especially in shallow lakes, the presence of aquatic plants increase water clarity. And that's because they hold down the sediments on the bottom. And then also they're competing for nutrients and light with algae. And so certain aquatic plants even produce chemicals into the water that reduce the amount of algae present. And then also their presence of their structure. When waves come in, they absorb some of that wave energy, which will then help reduce the erosion that is happening on the shoreline. So aquatic plants are pivotal. There's many of them, but of course, where we interact a lot with them is when we are dealing with invasive species. And so there are a small handful of invasive species that cause a tremendous amount of harm. Usually all of that harm is caused by the sheer amount of biomass that occurs, that can occur. So aquatic invasive plants reduce diversity because they outcompete native plants present in the lake. They might grow up quickly, create a canopy that shades out low-growing plants, for example. They have impacts on fisheries because they grow so dense. There's actually impacts, or there can be impacts to the feeding behavior of fish. They reduce that light penetration. They can impact dissolved oxygen. They can reduce property values. If your lake is invaded by Eurasian water milfoil, that can impact the value of your property. And then if you are actively managing these populations in your lake, it can be quite expensive to control it or attempt to control it, from $200 to $2,000 an acre spent on chemical control. So what should be done is a proactive approach. Prevention is key to the reduction of spread of invasive plants. Prevention is worth a lot. It doesn't cost very much, but it can make a big impact. And there's lots of programs out there, from the mobile boat wash stations, Clean Boats, Clean Waters. There's grants associated with Clean Boats, Clean Waters. And many of these fit with the clean, drain, dry message. We want to reduce the spread between lakes. And then there's also other programs like Ripple, for example, which tries to prevent the movement in a different way. So sometimes our invasive plants may come in aquariums, and we don't want those plants, those animals that are in aquariums, to get into our natural system. So there's lots of programs addressing all of these different invasive species pathways, is what we call it. But prevention's not perfect. It is not guaranteed to work. That doesn't mean we should stop doing it. Prevention is very important, but it's not guaranteed. And here's an example I like to give. There's a lake in northern Indiana that was invaded by Hydrilla, a really potent, terrible invasive plant. And so no matter what we can do with prevention, there's still a chance that an invasive species can get in. So the next line of defense, when you are doing prevention, you can also do early detection. And early detection is a monitoring program whose goal is to maximize the potential for eradication. Find those plants, find those invasive species before they become established. So the sooner you can detect something, the better. If we see Starry Stonewort, and this is what you see them in a small patch, you can, a little bit of management goes a long ways. But if you find the invasive plant in a big meadow covering over an acre of lake bottomland, now eradication becomes likely impossible, and management can be very costly. So early detection programs, they focus on the most probable invaders. So they look at a number of species that could come into a lake and then find which ones are most likely to invade. They target high-risk areas for those new invasions. So on lakes, that is typically where outside equipment goes into a lake. So a public boat launch might be a location where an invasive plant is introduced. And it requires continuous monitoring because you would look annually, you would want to look annually because there's always that chance it comes in that year. You want to be vigilant to find those new invasions. So Michigan's early detection program that all of us can be involved with is the Exotic Aquatic Plant Watch. So this is MiCorps, this is the CLMP's early detection program. And why get involved with the Plant Watch? It's because early detection and rapid response works. I showed this picture again because once again, if you can find a lake that is newly invaded by an invasive species, you can truly control it very well, maybe eradicate it. And so detecting those early allows you to respond rapidly, which is very successful. So is the Plant Watch for you? And the answer is likely yes. Early detection is important in many different types of lakes. So if your lake has no invasive plants, it's important to do this because if a plant gets in there, you want to find it. Lakes that are currently managing existing populations of invasive plants and have them under good control. So you want to know if new satellite populations might be popping around, or you want to detect if a new one is coming in. And that's what's coming in on this number 3. So it may be a little less valuable for lakes with invasive weeds covering large areas of the lake. However, it can still help you identify new invasions that are coming in. So if you have a large amount of Eurasian water milfoil, but no Starry Stonewort, the Plant Watch is a great program for you to be a part of so you can try to detect Starry Stonewort before it becomes an issue. So that gets us starting into not the protocol, but the background to the protocol. The key to early detection is to know your invasive species. If you don't know what you're looking for, it's impossible to detect something. And so the Exotic Aquatic Plant Watch focuses on 5 species: Eurasian water milfoil, curly-leaf pondweed, Starry Stonewort, Hydrilla, and European frogbit. If you are we provide a tremendous amount of materials to help with this identification. So the training that you're in today, and Joe and I give trainings all over the place throughout the year. We also have a copy. If you have registered for the Exotic Aquatic Plant Watch, you will get one of these in the mail in your kits from us. You can also go and get as many copies as you'd like from shop.msu.edu and search for E3189. Or you can have a free download. We also provide other helpful resources and ID tips, sampling protocols, all on the MiCorps website. And we also have a video, which is very helpful. So let's dive in. Let's look at these invasive species. So I split our 5 up into two categories. One of them being the established aquatic invasive plants in Michigan. So like I mentioned, most of the plants that we find under the water, on top of the water in Michigan are native, the vast majority. And there are only 3 common aquatic invasive plants, and that's Eurasian water milfoil, curly-leaf pondweed, and starry stonewort. Now, we also ask our volunteers to look for Hydrilla. Hydrilla has never been found in Michigan. However, it is knocking on our door. It has been in Ohio for years, and it's been in other states nearby, like I mentioned, Indiana earlier in this presentation. So we've never found it, but we ask for our volunteers to look for it because this is seen as maybe one of the worst invasive aquatic plants in the world. And so, and Michigan's inland lakes are ripe, they're perfect for this plant. And so there's a high likelihood that it may end up in Michigan at some point if prevention breaks down. Also, we have a new, more recent invader that we are seeing spread in Michigan's inland lakes, albeit somewhat slow, at least as what we can see so far, and that's European frogbit. This plant is a new invader and is only in a small handful of inland lakes in the state. So let's get into how to identify these plants. So this is one of our most common invasive plants. It's found across Michigan, not in all water bodies, but is found in many. The key characters. So what I like to say is, so when you first pick the plant up out of the water, the leaves look like feathers. So this is one whole leaf. They look like a feather. They kind of look like a kid's Christmas tree or a fern. If you are holding a plant out of the water that has that type of leaf, you are holding on to a milfoil. Now, there are many milfoils. Most of them are native. And so now we have to go a little bit further. So you see this fern-like leaf, and you also look at how the leaves are attached to the stem. And so these are all whirled around and not scattered, for example. The leaves are all around in a whirl. So if you see again, the fern-like leaf, the feather-like leaf, all whirled, then you count the number of leaflets, is what it's called. So this is one leaf. A leaflet are these little appendages that come out, and you want to count. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, maybe 17, kind of hard to see in this picture. And so if you have feather-like leaves, whirled leaf arrangement, and the leaves have 12 or more pairs of leaflets, you're holding on to Eurasian water milfoil. A secondary thing that's helpful is if you pull it out of the water, it drapes over your hand. That is a character of Eurasian water milfoil compared to the other native milfoils that if you pulled it out, it would actually still stay erect. The leaves would be are still very robust. So again, it's really down to feather-like leaves, more than 12 leaflets per leaf. Here's a depiction of a native milfoil. So here you can see it still looks like a feather, but there's much less than 12. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So this would not be Eurasian milfoil. This is one of our natives. Compared to Eurasian. Of course, what we have to make things difficult, or these plants need to make things difficult by hybridizing with one another. So Eurasian milfoil hybridizes with our native northern water milfoil, and those are pretty much impossible to identify with botanically. You have to have it actually genetically tested. So you can get clues though that it's hybrid because the characters are mismatched, and it's confusing when you're trying to be like, well, there's 11 leaflets or there's just 12 leaflets. Again, the only way you can identify that is through a genetic test though. Here are some lookalikes to Eurasian water milfoil to note, because there are a few native plants that look close. So here's, for example, is our native milfoil. They're all whorled. They have the kid's Christmas tree feather-like leaf, but they do not have 12 leaflets. Here's an example of a group of plants called Bladderworts. So this is a native carnivorous plant, which is kind of neat. And these can kind of look similar, right? It has kind of a feather-like leaf look, but if you look closely, these things right here, those are bladders that open and close. They open and suck in little invertebrates and dissolve them and eat them. And so milfoil does not have those bladders. And here's another one, a very, very common plant called Coontail. And as you can see, it could maybe be confused with Eurasian milfoil, but the leaves, which is this whole structure here, looks like a wishbone or a peace sign and not a feather-like plant. So which plant is Eurasian water milfoil? If you look at A, and we can just do the quiz together. So on A, we would say, well, it definitely looks like a milfoil, and it is. It's whorled, it has the kid's leaf or kid's tree-like structure, but if we count them carefully, they're under 12 leaflets per leaf. And if we look at this one at B, you can see it's whorled, and when we count the leaflets here, which I'll just say, it is over 12. So this is Eurasian water milfoil. This is one of our native milfoils, which looks like our northern water milfoil. So moving on to our next species, curly leaf pondweed. So curly leaf pondweed has ribbon-like leaves, strap-like leaves that are 2 to 3 inches long and 1/4 to 3/8 inch wide. And so we're looking like that. They have a very prominent midvein, and you can see that in this zoomed in picture here. So very prominent midvein. The leaves are alternate on the stem. And so if you can remember, I mentioned with that Eurasian water milfoil, it's whorled around the stem. So the leaves are all coming out in all directions. The alternate leaf arrangement would say, here's a leaf coming out of the stem, and then the next leaf would be coming here. So it's alternate on the leaf stem. So if you see a prominent midvein, you see that they're alternate on the leaf stem, and then you look closely on the side of the leaf. And if you can see carefully, there's these teeth. Then you are holding on to curly leaf pondweed. So curly leaf pondweed is the only pondweed with serrations or teeth on the leaf edge. There are, I think, like 27, 28 other native pondweeds, which can seem daunting, but none of them have the teeth on the edge of their leaf. So all 3 of these are not curly leaf pondweed. This one, you can see, has lots of branching, and then also, and that's not very common. And if we zoomed in, there'd be no teeth on the sides of the leaf. And that's the same with this one. Again, it even has kind of a wavy type look that could be confused with curly leaf pondweed. But when we look at the edge, you can see that there are no teeth. And then there's this plant that actually is kind of the right size of leaf that you can expect from curly leaf. But when you look closely, there is no midvein, or there's only a faint one, not very prominent, and there is no teeth on the edge. So this is variable leaf pondweed. This is white stem pondweed, and this is water stargrass. So which plant is curly leaf pondweed, A or B? So this is a pondweed, has alternate leaf arrangement. I can see some midvein in there, but when I look up close, there are no teeth. Whereas this one, if I zoom in there, I can see teeth on the back of that hand. And also that the lasagna noodles help give it away too. Those lasagna noodles, kind of wavy edge with the teeth, ensures that it's curly leaf pondweed. So the next plant, which can be pretty hard to identify, is Starry Stonewort. So this is not a plant at all. This is actually what's called a macroalgae, a big algae. And this plant is causing a lot of problems. I believe it's not been found in the UP, but it has definitely spread around large parts of the Lower Peninsula. You can identify this most definitively if you can find this structure right here. This is called a bulbul, and you can see it. Here's a bunch of Starry Stonewort in somebody's hand, and you can see these kind of white cream colored structures on what looks like fishing line. These are called rhizoids, and this is a bulbul, and it obviously looks like a star. So Starry Stonewort, so it gets its name from this structure. This is another picture zoomed in. No other plant, no other macroalgae in Michigan has this starry type bulbul. So if you see that, you have Starry Stonewort. Now, what if you don't see this? This plant looks very much like Cara, but what you can look at is this part of the plant right here. It has uneven branchlets, and I'll kind of show you what I mean by that. So here's an image that shows a whirl of leaf-like structures, and then it branches off like this. So it's not an even peace sign. Instead, it's offset and uneven. So all of our Cara does not branch, and our Nutella, a lookalike, has even branching. So here's the lookalike Cara. There are no star-shaped bulbils on these. Instead, they are perfectly round bulbils. They are much shorter. They're not as shorter branching, where Starry Stonewort can have some pretty long branching. Cara typically does not. Also, many of the species of Cara has a distinct smell. Another name for Cara is Musk Grass, and it smells like lake. I kind of like the smell, but I can imagine it being somewhat annoying. And then this is the other lookalike to Starry, and that's Nutella. And here, what it has is even branching, and you can kind of see it in these pictures where it's instead of uneven like Starry Stonewort, they are even, and they do not have any star-shaped bulbils. So which one is Starry Stonewort? A or B? And you can see there's that star-shaped bulbul compared to right here where here's some cream white colored structures. These are perfect, like circles, perfectly ball shaped. And that is Cara here. And here's Starry Stonewort. Moving on to Hydrilla. Hydrilla, again, has not been found in Michigan. However, we are looking for it because it is a big danger to our lakes. So these plants have teeth on the sides of the leaf and then also on the underside of the leaf. And that's what this part of the illustration is depicting. So these teeth are what separates it out from all other plants in Michigan that have this similar look. So, and I missed one important component, is that the leaves are coming out in whorls of 4 to 8. So in this one, there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 5 leaves per whorl. We have some native lookalikes, and they really look like Hydrilla. However, there's 2 key things that are helpful is to look at the number of leaves and to look at the teeth on the side and underside of the leaves of the native. So like I mentioned, Hydrilla has teeth along the edge and along the backside. Elodea, if you use magnification, you might be able to see some minute teeth, but there are no teeth you can see with your naked eye or the bottom part of the leaf. Also, Elodea typically only has 3 leaves per whorl. 1, 2, 3. Here's is here. 1, 2, 3. Compared to 4 or more leaves on Hydrilla. So again, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Now, Elodea can sometimes have more than 3. What's happening here is if it won't be consistent. So if you, in Hydrilla, you will always have more than 4. And on Elodea, they'll mostly be 3, sometimes 2, sometimes 4 or 5, but it's only sometimes. So this is not Hydrilla. it has those leaves coming along the whorl, but when you count the numbers, 1, 2, 3, you look at a zoomed in here, there are no obvious teeth. And so that is Elodea, our native lookalike. So which plant is Hydrilla? So obviously I've been showing this picture a lot. This is Hydrilla and this is not. B is not. When you look at this a little bit, you can see that there are tons of spikes on the stem of this plant. And Hydrilla does not. They have spikes on the underside and on the underside of the leaf and the leaves themselves, but not on the stem. This is a spiny, it's called spiny naiad. Okay, now rounding out into our final plant, and that's European frogbit. So this was first discovered in 1996 in Southeast Michigan in the Detroit River system, and it's primarily on the coasts. So along the Lake Erie that is, Lake St. Clair, Huron River, that's where we are, Huron Lake Huron. It's been a long day apparently. That's where we predominantly see this plant. But we've started to see in the last few years, specifically after 2016, we've started to detect it in multiple inland waters. So Pentwater Lake, the lower Grand River, Reeds and Fisk Lakes in Grand Rapids, Dansville State Game Area, and then a few lakes in the Pinckney-Waterloo area. So how do you identify European frogbit? This one is fairly easy because there's not a plant that really looks like this. This is a free-floating plant that, what I mean by that is it's not rooted. The leaves float on the surface and the roots dangle below. They look like maybe little water lily leaves, but they're much smaller, only 2 to 3 inches of this heart-shaped leaf. And the flowers are very different from our white water lily flowers, where there's only 3 petals to this leaf compared to many petals of the white water lily. This plant also shoots out runners, like you can kind of think of like strawberries. And so you can see in this depiction where one plant can spread and create new plants. So just taking a zoomed out, if you're standing on a boat, since these are free floating plants, they get pushed with the wind. And so you might see them pushed up against the shoreline or other emergent plants. So what we see here is narrowleaf cattail, and we see our native white water lily in front of us. And then you can barely tell that they're circular because they're so small, and with the picture's not the greatest, but this is European frogbit. So the leaves are much smaller than even the smallest white water lily. Also, if anyone's tried to pull on a white water lily leaf, they are rooted in the bottom, unlike European frogbit, which is free floating. So which plant is European frogbit? A, we have these smaller heart-shaped leaves with only 3 petals for the flower, white petals. This is European frogbit, where this, you can see with the scale. So we're looking at centimeters here, but even inches, you can see that this is over 6 inches in size. And so this is white water lily. So those are the species we have and that we actively want you to look for in your lakes. But of course, there are some very rare species that might be coming into Michigan, and that is looking at our Michigan watch list species. So these species have never been detected in the wild, or they have very limited distribution. They also have a very high potential for negative impacts. And so early detection is very important, so that if it's found, there will be a large reaction towards its control and hopefully eradication. So that's it for my portion on identification, and then I'll leave it to Joe. I guess I could answer some questions too.
Well, we only have one question that didn't get answered in the chat, and it's one that I looked up the answer for while you were talking, Eric. So I'll actually take it.
Feel free.
And you can comment if you want after I respond. But Ralph asked, does the state or the CLMP team know the percentage of Michigan inland lakes that have public boat access, which is more than 1,700 lakes, that are known to have AIS infestations? And then a follow-up question, how about the percentage of CLMP, Exotic Aquatic Plant Watch lakes? So I did a quick look, and what I can tell you is that last year's Exotic Aquatic Plant Watch lakes, just over 50%, 53% of the lakes that conducted this protocol found at least one invasive aquatic plant target species from this program in their lake. So 53%. Of course, that's kind of a biased sample, right? It's the lakes that are participating in this program. As to statewide, no, there is not a comprehensive survey of all 1,700 public access lakes that I'm aware of. However, in 2019, when fieldwork was still easy to do, the DNR did do a survey of public boat launches. They surveyed, looks like 157 of them. And they looked at more than just the 5 plants we are talking about. They also looked for zebra mussels and a few other invasive species. And of those 157 places they looked, 45% of them had no AIS at all at the launch. So almost half were AIS free. And I'm going to put the link to that report. Actually, helpfully, MLSA has it on their website, and that's where I found it. But I'll put the link to it in the chat for folks that want to take a look at that. Good question, Ralph. All right, Eric, I think we're going to switch, and I'm going to share my screen now.
Yep, all yours.
How's that looking?
Looks
good. All right, great. So now we're going to get into the actual procedure. Now that Eric has taught you why you want to look for invasive plants in your lake and what they look like, you've learned what they look like. Now we're going to tell you how to go do that survey and report what you find. So in the paperwork that you receive from us, you should get a number of things. And some of that is also available. You can download them from our website. If you don't have a copy or if you want extra copies, you can get them there. So there's a data form, just like everything else. There's instructions on how to build your sampling rake, which I'll show you in a minute. There's a copy of that book that Eric showed at the beginning. It's a spiral bound book called The Michigan Boater's Guide to Selected Invasive Plants, Aquatic Invasive Plants. There's a plant photography card that you can print out and laminate yourself to make it waterproof. So you can put wet plants right on it. We can also provide those to you. They'll get sent in packets to some of the volunteers. A copy of that plant watch list that Eric just showed you of the plants that are not established in Michigan yet, and a brochure about the Exotic Aquatic Plant Watch. So that's all materials that you will receive from us or can download and print from our website. Of course, you have to bring some stuff too, like your boat, safety equipment, flotation devices, anchor. Anchor is important because you want to be able to sit still when you're sampling certain spots on your lake and not get blown around by the wind and the waves. Bring whatever plant identification guides you like. Obviously, we provide you with some, but you may have other books or guides that you like. A depth map of your lake, or if you have a depth finder on your boat, that's really helpful to know the different depths of the lake where you'll be sampling. A GPS unit is optional, but it does help you document where you found or didn't find invasive plants. A camera is also optional to bring out in the field with you, but we really are moving towards requiring pictures of plants that you find, because we want to be able to confirm. We do get a lot of mistakes, especially with people who are new, and that's fine. That's what we're here for. And we're going to talk to you about how to take good pictures and how to send them to us. If you have questions during the course of your survey, you can certainly do that, and we can weigh in on what you're looking at in the lake. A weighted line to let you know how deep the water is can be helpful. The rake is really important. We'll talk about that in a minute. Ziploc bags to take any samples back to shore that you want to look at more closely. A marker you can use to label that Ziploc bag as to where that plant was found. It's great to have a trash bag with you because if you pull invasive plants out of your lake, you probably don't want to throw them back in. So having some way to dispose of them is handy. Bring a clipboard so you can have your data forms on there, a copy of the procedures if you want, and again, a waterproof writing utensil like a pencil or an indelible ink pen. Sharpies work really nicely. Here is the high-tech sampling equipment that we use. If we were in person, I'd be waving this around. It's an aquatic plant sampling rake, and this is exactly what professional plant biologists use to collect aquatic plants too. So, you know, you'll be right there just like us with the technique, the tool that you're using. We provide you instructions on how to make your own. So you'll need a couple of garden rakes that you cut the handle off and attach together and then attach to the rope. You know, a lot of times people can find, you can go buy new rakes if you want, or you can find old rakes at a garage sale or something to use for this purpose, and they work just fine. One thing that I have heard from people who maybe think, well, if I'm going to cut the handle off, I'm going to buy the cheapest rake I can find at the hardware store and go from there. One of the challenges with that approach is that some people report when they do that, there is no wood that goes down into the metal part of the handle. So there's nothing to attach an eye bolt to. So you might not want to go for the very cheapest rake if you're looking to buy something new to create your sampling rake. But as you can imagine, a tool like this is very effective at collecting plants. If you've ever pulled up your anchor from your boat and had it covered with weeds, something with this many teeth is going to do an even better job. So that's the tool of the trade. The next question is, when should you do it? What time of year is the best time to go out and sample for invasive plants in your lake? So we recommend, as a general rule, mid-June through August are the best times. You want to be out there when there's plenty of plant growth in your lake. If you go too soon, some of the plants are going to be very small. They might be difficult to identify. One thing I'll note on that is that curly leaf pondweed, one of those 3 established invasive species, tends to grow early in the season. That's one of the ways that it becomes, has an advantage over our native plants, is it can grow a lot when it's still pretty cold in the water, and the native plants kind of fall behind. And so the curly leaf pondweed can kind of take off. So if you're concerned about curly leaf pondweed, don't wait too long, because by August, it'll probably start dying off in your lake because it doesn't like warm water. You, of course, can do additional surveys throughout the year. You don't have to just do it once. If you want to go out a couple times just to see if you catch something you didn't see before, you can certainly do that. And there's a place where you can write all of your sampling dates right on your data sheet. So we talked about when, now where. So where do you start? That's kind of important to think about. So the first thing you should do is get a map of your lake, something that you can look at to kind of say, okay, here's what I'm dealing with here. So here's our example lake. We use Gull Lake, the home of MSU's Kellogg Biological Station. So here's your lake map. So that's really important. And then look for a few important features that you're going to want to sample near. First is boat ramps. I think we all know that one of the most common ways that aquatic invasive species are introduced into a lake is by boats that come in on a trailer from a lake that had invasive species. And those invasive species get tangled on the trailer and on the propeller and other parts of the boat and trailer, and then get transported to the next lake down the road. So you definitely want to sample by boat ramps. That's a requirement. You also want to look for other locations where people might be transporting invasive plants into the lake. So look for things on the map like public beaches and parks, and you know your lake, you know where these places are. Also look for inlets. So here's an inlet stream we'd point out. See this little stream flowing in? This could be a source of invasive species coming from another water body. So any attached inlet like stream, creek, or canal is important to locate. So if you can't sample anywhere else on your lake, maybe you have a really big lake or you just don't have a lot of time, these are the places we want you to concentrate your effort. Boat ramps, public beaches and parks, and attach inlets like streams, creeks, and canals. Then if you want to do more, you can look for other features like quiet bays and coves. You know, those are the places that tend to be the weediest, right? Plants tend to do really well in there. So there may be some invasive species hiding out in there. And also these would be areas like this, little quiet bays that don't get a lot of boats ripping through them and stuff, the plants might really like it in there. And then you may think, okay, well, I've located all these places, but I've got this whole stretch of shoreline that I haven't done any sampling on. If you've got the time and interest, then definitely locate what we would call transects, some additional sampling lines in those areas if you have the time to do that. So really the focus here is to focus on high risk areas. So again, here's another lake. Example lake, Fremont Lake, here's a boat launch. These red spots, these are the high risk areas. You're at a boat launch, you're at an inlet here. Here's another red one, that's another boat launch. Here's another inlet, over here's another inlet. So that's where we want you to focus. If you have more time, you can fill in. These are some other spots. Purple indicates places that might not be as high of risk, but if you have the time, absolutely go out there and survey there too, so you get a more in-depth coverage of your lake. Now, something I definitely want to recommend is that even some data is useful. It's okay if you can't survey, every 100 yards along your shoreline. We still want that data. It'll be useful for you and it'll be useful for us, because you'll still be able to say, well, maybe all I did was I went to the 2 boat launches. That's all I had time to do. Nobody was interested in helping me. I had a busy summer, whatever. Well, now you have a record of, in this summer, 2022, were there not invasive species at those boat launches? That's important information, even if you didn't get to any of these other places. So please submit whatever you manage to do, because it's useful. All right. Now, how do you actually do the sampling? Well, I want to define the word transect, because I've mentioned it a couple of times, but it's important in what we're talking about. And it's the reason why we draw lines on the maps instead of just having a point to sample. Often different kinds of aquatic plants grow better in different water depths. And so instead of just sampling at the shore, we recommend that you sample at a few different depths along a transect, which is a line, an imaginary line that's perpendicular to the shore. So here's your shoreline. This is actually a boat ramp right here. And you may set up your transect here and decide, okay, my imaginary line is right here. I'm going to sample at about 3 feet. I'm going to go out to about 8 feet and then 15 feet deep. Because we know that plants like, especially Eurasian water milfoil, Starry Stonewort, Hydrilla, they'll grow in quite deep water. While other plants like European frogbit it's not rooted, so it tends to wash up closer to shore. So, on your map, before you even go out, it's great to kind of draw yourself on a map, that imaginary line at each site you want to sample, and that's your transect. So that's an important question. Some other questions to think about is, how many times do I toss the rake into the water to collect plants? How far do I throw it? What do I do with the plants after I collect them? So let's talk about that. So here's a good example of a picture of someone. This is John Ransom from the Benzie Conservation District. A few years ago, I was able to go out with him and do some plant surveying on Crystal Lake in Benzie County. And you can see him doing a pretty remarkable throw. It's probably farther than I would recommend most people throw the rake out. But remember, you're just trying to find what plants are in the area on your transect that you're interested in surveying. So you can send that rake out into the water and then drag it back in. If you're in a really weedy area, in fact, I recommend not throwing it out too far, because your rake's going to get full. And then you're just dragging a full rake that isn't catching anything else on the way back up to the boat. So toss it into the water and then gently pull it up out of the lake. And you'll see the plants attached to it there. I can see from here, he's got at least 2 different species on that rake, and bring them up on the boat to identify and document them. And so, you'll have your data sheet and you want to write down whatever you happen to find. You can toss the rake once or twice at any given depth. It's really kind of up to you. This is not meant to be a quantitative survey. You're not, calculating the quantity of aquatic plants. It's really to find out, are they there or not? So you can kind of adjust that based on how much time you have. And then if you happen to find any invasive plants, again, I mentioned it's important and useful to have a trash bag on board so you can dispose of them and not just end up tossing them back in the lake, which may cause them to float around the lake and spread to new places. All right. Data forms. So you're on the boat, somebody on your team has their clipboard, they've got the data form there handy. And this is where you're going to be collecting the information and documenting your survey. So much like our other data forms, again, this is going to look familiar. This is the top half, lake name and county, location, the names of all your volunteers. You can write multiple dates if you survey on more than one date, the time, and any comments. An important comment is recent weed treatments. We recommend that if you're going to do these surveys, try and do them before any weed management is happening, because I mean, the weed treatment is supposed to kill the invasive plants, right? So if you go out shortly after that treatment, you may have trouble finding them. So it's most effective if you can learn if any treatment is happening on your lake to try and avoid those dates so you can see the conditions before those treatments happen. So that's important to note. Let's move on to the bottom half of the page 1. If you check the box, if no invasive plants were found, when you did all your survey of the lake, if you never found any, you check this box. If you did, check what species you found. Eurasian Milfoil, curly-leaf pondweed, Hydrilla, Starry Stonewort, European frogbit is relatively new. When we started this program, we didn't have it in Michigan very much, and so we weren't even looking for it. So we've added that recently. You can also note other things you find that you want to report. And then you would then, at the end, your total report should include this completed data form, pages 1 and 2. We're going to look at page 2 in a minute. A lake map that shows your numbered locations where you surveyed them. It's helpful if you number them. And then the photographs you've taken of the plants you collected. Okay. Now, this is really important. Check the box if you didn't find any invasive plants. We want to know and see your report if you didn't find anything, because that's data. No plants is still data, and it's important data. So when we first started this program, maybe about 16, 17 years ago, some of our volunteers said, oh, we went and surveyed, we didn't find anything, so we won't turn in a report. Well, not finding invasive species is outstanding data. We definitely want to see that. So definitely send that our way. Now, page 2 is where the real data is, where you report what you actually found. So it's a table that you can fill out and you use it to document the results of your survey. So there's a column for the numbers of your site. So this just shows 2 sites that were surveyed. In this case, we had latitude and longitude, but you could also describe, use a description, landmarks, that kind of thing. Please don't use people's names, like don't say Joe Latimore's house, because we have to redact and black out all the personal information that's on these reports. So use other things to identify where you were. Then there's a place to list any exotics you found in that transect. So here they use an abbreviation, CLP, curly-leaf pondweed, EWM, Eurasian water milfoil. Anything you think we'll understand is fine. So at transect 1, the volunteer found these 2 species. Transect 2, they didn't find any. Were there any photos taken at the site? Yes, 2, because there was 2 species. And they made a note that it was sparse. There was only a couple of each plant, not a ton of it at that spot. And then here they didn't take any photos because there were no plants to report. So you can go on some lakes, if they do a lot of surveying, they have several pages of this table to report everything that they found. All right. Now I mentioned photos and bringing a camera. It's really valuable. And in fact, we are asking people now, it was optional in the past, but we're requiring now that you include at least 1 representative photo of every invasive species you found in your lake. This is a quality control thing and to help you know for sure what you have, because we've definitely had instances where people send in photos thinking they had one thing and it was another. So if you send us a good photo of the plant, we can confirm that for you. And it goes into the record and into our database as confirmation of what you found. So here's a picture of Eurasian water milfoil. This is the laminated sheet that we provide. It's got rulers on it for scale. You can label the photo. Dry erase markers work great. You can write right on the laminated sheet and then wipe it off when you take a picture of something new. The one thing this doesn't have, it has the name of it, but what it doesn't have is a label showing where the plant was found. So really there should be, site 1 should also be written on here. So we know this is Eurasian milfoil that you found at site 1. And that'll be useful for you too, to share with others. You can show people the pictures of the invasive plants that you found. So make sure you label your photos, make sure the photos are clear, and make sure that they show the identifying characters that you use to confirm that this was, for example, Eurasian water milfoil. So here you can see the volunteer took the leaves and spread them out nicely so you could count the leaflets and know, oh, there's definitely more than 12. This is definitely Eurasian water milfoil. So this is a really great resource, both for us to help you verify your identifications, but also for you to have documentation of what you found. Here's some other examples of that laminated photography card being used. Here you can easily see the ripples of the curly leaf pondweed. Here you can see that they took a photo of native Elodea that looks like Hydrilla to show that, we know this isn't Hydrilla. Here's a photo that shows it's not Hydrilla. So feel free to send photos of native plants that you find as well. If you don't have the laminated sheet with you, taking a photo with your hand in it will also help, because for us to know what size the plant is that you're showing us helps us immensely. In this case, we can tell this is Starry Stonewort because there's that star right there. But for some plants, just showing a picture of a big clump isn't going to be very useful. Like if this is milfoil all clumped up in a knot, we'd have trouble actually knowing what it is. So spread out those leaves. If it's a milfoil, make it so we can see the structures that we really need to see. We also mentioned that a complete report includes a map. So here's an example of someone just printed off a map of their lake from the web and with pencil drew in. You can see 1, 2, here they did the numbering a little strange, 3, 4, 5, 6. And then they had that table that said at site 6, we found this, and site 9, we found that. So we can make that connection, which is really useful. You can also use Google Maps if you're handy with that. One of our volunteers on Stony Lake in Oceana County, do a good job using Google Maps, where they put pins at every location that they have surveyed, and then they make a legend that shows what they found. It's got description of each location, not using people's names, which is really great. It says like log cabin dock and public beach and airplane dock. And then it says CLPW. They found curly leaf pondweed there on July 16th and August 13th. Super handy. You can also use Google Earth. That has many of the same options on it. It's just whatever level of technology you want to use, from the paper drawn map to, Google software. Feel free to use whatever works best for you. All right. The last piece is actually turning in your report. So make sure that you make copies of all your data for your records. Don't send us your originals. You get to keep those, of course. Enter your data into the MiCorps data exchange by October 31st. And it's a pretty quick process with the Plant Watch. It's just, here's where we went, here's the species we found. You don't have to enter the individual location data or anything. Send a copy of your complete report with the tables, the photos, the maps, everything to us. And the instructions are on the data sheets. So as I mentioned before, that includes the data form, the map, and any photographs. All right, and that'll all come to us. Here's one thing that we found with people who sign up for this and then don't complete it at the end of the year. When we ask them, well, what happened? You wanted to do this. Why were you unable to do it? And one of the issues was they struggled to doing it by themselves. They really would have done better or wanted to have folks help them out. A couple of people from the lake, maybe, to go out and help them, or even family members or people from the community. But it felt a little too much to take on their own. And so they ended up giving up on it and not doing it. So keep that in mind. If you're thinking about doing this and right now it's just you, talk to your neighbors, talk to people in your community, think about who might be interested in helping you out and learning a little bit, something new about your lake in the process. Definitely teams are more likely to complete the sampling and continue the program, and it makes it more fun. So that's one of the reasons why we created a brochure just about the Exotic Plant Watch. We have information about the program. So share that information with potential other volunteers that might want to help you. And think about some of these maybe non-traditional sources of volunteers. You know, people who love terrestrial plants like gardeners and botanical club folks and stuff, they might really be fascinated to learn about aquatic plants because they might not have the opportunity to get out on a boat and look at aquatic plants like you do. So think about that. Think about other people in your watershed associate or watershed group or lake association. There may even be youth groups that are interested in doing it. So think about that. For example, master gardeners, you may know some of them, and they actually have to do volunteer service to maintain their status. So they might jump right on that opportunity. And then the part I'm most excited about this year is staff field visits. And I'm excited about it because it's talking about staff being myself and Eric actually getting to come out to some of the lakes this year. We've put field visits on hold for a couple of years because of COVID. And this summer, we're looking forward to being able to resume those. So we will be reaching out to a number of you that are enrolled for this year to try and schedule a time to come out to your lake and meet with you. To kick things off. We can help you kick off your survey, assist you with plant identification, answer any questions that you have and get your feedback. But keep in mind, we can't get to every lake by all means, but we're going to put priority on lakes that are new to the program. And that includes new for the last couple of years because we haven't been able to do these for a couple of years. So that's our top priority. If you're not a new lake, but have a reason why you think we really need to come out and visit your lake, reach out to us and we can see if we can fit you into our schedule. We know we're going to be really busy with this this year. So hopefully we can get to as many lakes as possible. And I have to note that you see the little license plate up there in the corner. If you have one of these Protecting Our Waters license plates, that's actually the program that allows us to have a budget to do these field visits. So I know I have one on my vehicle, maybe you have one on yours, but those license plates help fund projects like this. So I'll mention that license plate opportunity to you if you ever thought about getting one on your vehicle. So that's the process. We now have some time for questions. So I'm going to ask if Eric has any questions that have come in on the chat or if folks want to type in questions now.
We have a suggestion. It sounds like from Ralph, who maybe lost some equipment in the water before. He suggests maybe make sure to secure your rake to the end of the boat. So
not a bad idea. Not a bad idea at all. And also the other part of that is making sure that when you tie that knot between your rope and the rake head, to make sure that's super secure. Like if you think it's enough knots, like tie another one. I'm not good at tying knots. I just tie lots of knots and that seems to work too. So I have been on the lake with volunteers where they did a really nice toss and that rake just went sailing and he was left with just the rope in his hand. So I think they tried to use a clever little carabiner clip and it stuck open and off went the rake head. So yeah, that can definitely happen. You'll also want to think about how deep your lake is and how much rope you want to put on that rake. You want to make sure it'll hit the bottom, even if if you're going out into 15-foot depth or so, make sure that it's long enough to reach to the bottom and with a little slack for tossing and dragging it.
For sure. Any other questions, anyone? Folks are saying great training and thank you for all of today's presentations. I love seeing all these positive things towards us. Thank you all.
All right. I'm gonna have to stop sharing my slides and look at the chat and see all the positivity. I'm really excited that everyone is here. And yeah, if there's more questions, we can get to them. But we're excited about this season, maybe more than some of the past ones, because we do have that opportunity to visit some of the lakes. And we were able to connect with a lot of our long-term volunteers at the recent Michigan Lakes and Streams Association conference. So it is nice to be able to do that again.
So nice. There is a question here with Score the Shore. Can you say something about how the data can be used?
Oh, you bet. Yeah. So the Score the Shore data, as I mentioned during the training, I really do believe it's one of the most informative, educational protocols that you can get involved with, because you immediately could share it. And one example that I've seen that I really liked is people will make a map. that shows, maybe color codes, different parts of the lake in those different sections with like green is good and red is bad and orange is moderate, fair. And people love to see that. I've seen those displayed at lake association meetings where they'll say, hey, come see how our shoreline is doing. And oh no, my house is in the red area. Like what's going on there? And you can, as the volunteer, you can say, well, I helped score that section of shore. And even though we had some good, vegetated buffer, we have a ton of seawalls there. And maybe we need to think about adjusting that. So showing it graphically is true. You can also dig into the data a little more and look at things like, how are we doing just in terms of how much of our shoreline has active weed management happening? And is it necessary? Right. So you'd be able to go in and just look at those numbers specifically. So if there's key issues that you think your lake is struggling with, or on the flip side, things that you think your lake is doing really well, you can highlight that and say, gosh, we have unmowed vegetation on 80% of our lake. We're doing really great in that category. So let's just keep that up and maybe look for areas where you're scoring a little more poorly as opportunities for education and, programs around your lake.
Excellent. And I threw in some, I was going to do that earlier during Score the Shore, but I threw in some links to some shoreline resources for everyone that Joe mentioned some of them during your talk. Okay, any other questions regarding any of the parameters? Feel free to ask them now. We'll do that awkwardly long pause. That's actually only 2 seconds.
Right. But it's good. It's good to be able to do that and give people a chance to think about it. But I'll also mention, we're here for you. That's what we're here for, is to support your volunteer efforts. So if there's any questions that you think of, I know a lot of, we answer emails from you guys on a regular basis, daily. We see questions coming in, and that's what we're there for. You can reach out to us individually. We also have a general email address that's just MiCorps@msu.edu. So you can email that. If you're not sure who to ask your question of, just shoot it to that address. We'll make sure the right person gets it and answers it in a timely fashion.